justice, and the American way. We are the Voices of Dissent.
Welcome back to the Voices of Dissent, and we are live from Fort Wayne, Indiana. This is Justin McKenzie. I'm joined by Marc Jernigan, Ric Runsteadt, Jon Olinger, executive producer Joe Walburn. You can join the conversation by giving us a call at 260-969-1250. That's 260-969-1250. Or you can join us online at voicesofdissent.net. That's voicesofdissent.net. We've been spending the day talking about JFK. This is the 51st anniversary of his tragic murder, and we've been talking about how it's affected our lives as a country, how the CIA, the Federal Reserve has all gone gangbusters since then. And Rick, tell us a little bit more about what you think the world would look like today if JFK was not assassinated.
Well, assuming that the CIA, Federal Reserve, or the Federal Reserve controlled CIA hadn't went ahead and engaged in the same sort of actions, let's say Kennedy had been able to go through with his plans, and let's say instead of having a fiat currency that is absolutely worthless paper that is manipulated and controlled by a small cartel of international bankers, imagine if we had sound currency. Imagine if instead of us having money that says at the top of it, Federal Reserve note is what? It's debt. Instead of saying, here's debt from the Federal Reserve that we're going to give you, and that's what they do. They print the money out of thin air and loan it to the government at interest. Imagine if we had sound currency backed by a physical asset, in this case, silver. And imagine if from 1964 until today, we had had little to no inflation. Do you know what our standard of living would be like? And instead of the nation totally and completely under the control of the Federal Reserve, what if the people decided on things? What if instead of the total transformation that the Jacob Javits immigration bill had from 1965, we hadn't had that? What if our institutions had remained strong instead of all of the power being consolidated in the federal government? What if instead of us constantly invading the world and inviting the world and going to war after war after war, what if we had maintained a policy of friendship to all, enemy to none, and that we were maintaining a defensive posture? This country would be so fantastically different. First off, we wouldn't have a $17 going on $18 trillion official debt with somewhere between $100 to $250 trillion real debt with unfunded liabilities. So our country would be wildly different if we hadn't had the coup.
And we have joining us now Dr. Jerome Corsi. Jerome Corsi is a Harvard PhD, is a WND senior staff reporter, and he's authored many books, including the #1 New York Times bestsellers, The Obama Nation, Unfit for Command, and his latest book is Who Really Killed Kennedy. Thank you, Dr. Corsi, for being on the show with us today.
Great. I've got an ebook. It's called Corsy on JFK.com, and I want to talk about that. But I'm at Dealey Plaza right now. I'm in today is the 51st anniversary of the JFK assassination, and I'm attending these two conferences. I'm sitting across the street from the Texas School Book Depository, so I'm right there now.
Wow, that's amazing, Dr. Jerome Corsi. My name is Marc Jernigan. How are you today?
Good, Mark, and I'm going to be with, we're kind of touring the plaza. I'm here with Jim Marrs. I'll put Jim on the phone. I'm sure listeners know who he is. He's the writer of so many great books on the assassination going back to Crossfire. And he has a new edition of Crossfire out. And Jim and I are going to tour together here, Dealey Plaza, which is going to be really an interesting event. I'll put Jim on. He's coming over here in a minute. But that's where I am today, and that's what we're doing. So We'll be short with you today, but then we'll get back with you more and get another time.
Well, Dr. Corsi, this is Ric Runsteadt, and I just first off want to say thank you so much for your service to this country. You are a true American patriot. You have done fantastic research, fantastic work. Somehow you managed to go to Harvard and get your doctorate degree and not become totally corrupt, and instead you came out as this incredible beacon of journalistic integrity. And we're feeling like we got a 2-for-1 to also get Jim Marrs. That's just fantastic. So thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you for the kind words. You know, I went to Harvard for an education, not for a religious conversion.
There you go.
I had to drink the socialist Kool-Aid. I listened to it, and they explained to me all of what they did. I understood it, I thought they were foolish enough to believe that nonsense. It was good for them, but I wasn't going to. I still got a great education out of it because I pick and choose what I wanted, and that was, at any rate, this Q Corsy on JFK. Just quickly before I put Jim on to say hello, it's under $5, and it's meant to be a book that I'm going to publish all new research. I'm going to, so for instance, I got 5 articles down the current research. One time you buy it, you get to download it free for all the subsequent editions. So I'll be putting a piece up from Jim Mars here in the next week or so. It's going to be continually updated. So listeners who want to see what's the most current going on will be able to, at CorsyOnJFK.com, they'll be able to have a update all the time with the editions I'm putting on.
Sure. Dr. Corsi, on the show, every member of the cast on our show believes that it was a coup. Are you in the same camp with us?
Oh, yeah. I mean, absolutely. Anybody who takes a reasonable look at the evidence. I mean, you got to remember going back into the 50s, the FBI and, CIA was actually paying through Operation Mockingbird journalists to report the CIA story, Jim. And, they're still doing it. I mean, it's just, the media is reporting the propaganda of and this whole idea of Lee Harvey Oswald. Most likely, Lee Harvey Oswald was a CIA agent and working with the FBI. That's the increasing evidence. In fact, the article I'm going to publish on CorsyOnJFK.com next with Jim Mars is going to be Jim Mars' research. I'm featuring other people's research. Jim's newest research is proving that Oswald was an FBI agent. Let's put Jim on the phone here for a minute.
Sure,
Okay,
absolutely.
great.
Thank you.
Great. Jim, welcome to the program. We are so excited to have you. This is Ric Runsteadt, and we are Voices of Dissent. And we're excited to have you on here. You have done absolutely fantastic work. I want to ask you, in poll after poll, overwhelmingly Americans consider the official story with regards to JFK as preposterous. It's somewhere between 61 to 70% believe, as does the U.S. Congress from 1978, that there were multiple gunmen involved. But there's still around 20-25% of people who believe the official story, despite all of the evidence. I mean, it's like the old Groucho Marx: who are you going to believe, your own lying eyes or me? And why would you think that there's still maybe 20-25% of people who still believe the official story, despite how unbelievably discredited it is?
Well, I think the basic situation there is they don't want to know. Okay, it's discomforting. And they have not taken the time and trouble to actually study the full width and breadth of the evidence. They have taken the government at its word, which so many people did for so many years. And what the government told us was all not necessarily untrue. It simply was not the full truth. For example, the evidence that Lee Harvey Oswald, this his mother always told me, was working for the United States government is beyond question. I mean, they've got a CIA paymaster who said he paid money to Oswald while he was in Japan. He had a high security clearance because he was a radar operator handling our secret CIA U-2 spy missions. He had a camera on him, a little Minox camera known as a spy camera that carried a serial number that showed it was not commercially available. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And as Jerome mentioned, in fact, there is some evidence, and I'll admit not conclusive, but very persuasive, to show that Lee Oswald, at the same time as working for the CIA or perhaps naval intelligence, was also subbing as a FBI informant. Texas authorities even had his code, which was T-179. And what I find really fascinating is there was an attempt on Kennedy a few weeks before the Dallas trip, when he made a trip to Chicago. And in talking with Abraham Bolden, the first black Secret Service agent, he said that thanks to the word of an informant, that they changed security procedures in Chicago, and that assassination did not take place. And he said the only thing he could find out about the identity of this informant was that his name was Lee.
Yeah, we had Judith Very Baker on our show yesterday.
Okay.
We talked to her yesterday. We heard that exact same thing from Judith Very Baker.
Isn't that interesting?
Isn't that interesting that Lee Harvey actually told her that he had thwarted an attempt in Chicago? There's also a rumor about an attempt in Miami as well, and that was thwarted as well.
Right. Yeah, they did the same thing there. He was scheduled to make a motorcade through Miami, but then they got word that there was some danger there, so he ended up riding by helicopter into the stadium there.
Correct. Can you do me a favor, because you're standing right in Dealey Plaza? I mean, you're right there right now. Can you do me a favor? Can you tell me why it was such an excellent place to pull the execution off?
Well, because despite what it looks like in photographs, it's actually a pretty small place. I stepped off from the center of Elm Street, where the fatal headshot took place, up to the point behind the picket fence on the grassy knoll, where a photograph shows a person, a figure, firing a weapon, and that was like 25 meters. You know, that's almost handgun distance.
It's almost handgun distance, right?
Yeah, and the key to it is that if Oswald or any other person with a rifle was on the 6th floor of the Book Depository building and wanted to shoot somebody coming in an open limousine, the shot would be coming north on Houston Street.
Yes,
it'd be coming right at him, and it would be a stationary target.
Right at you.
But we're told that Oswald waited until he had made a 120-degree turn right in front of the building. He could have chunked the rifle down, probably hit him on the head, and then moved laterally downhill away from the building with intervening trees in the line of sight.
Correct.
And that's when he took his shots, which makes no sense whatsoever. But it does make sense if you understand that Kennedy rode into a triangulation of fire, which is standard military ambush tactics. And that means that they put him in a position where he could be fired upon not only from possibly the School Book Depository, but from the Daltex building, which is just to the east of the Book Depository building, or from the other end of the Depository building, and from the North Knoll, and possibly even from the South Knoll.
Mr. Mars.
Keep in mind that the acoustical scientists for the House Committee, Select Committee on Assassinations, testified that they could not rule out as many as 9 or 10 sounds as being gunshots. But, of course, they only tested from 2 locations, the 6th floor of the depository and behind the fence on the grassy knoll. And they said with, 98% certainty that shots came from those 2 locations. And I submit if they had test fired from further down the fence or from the west end of the Book Depository or from the south knoll, they might have been able to determine that another shot came from there. And, of course, if it did, then you're talking about 3 shooters, and they're firing 3 rounds each, and that's the same amount that the acoustical scientists said they could not rule out as being gunshots.
Correct.
Mr. Mars, Jon Olinger here. I've been to Dealey Plaza also, and the one thing that concerned me about the grassy knoll issue, from the fence, if you have a crowded plaza, can a shooter get over the heads of the people standing in line to watch the president?
Oh yeah, because the picket fence on the grassy knoll sits high above the road. In fact, if you get in the parking lot there behind this picket fence, you can't even see Elm Street. So anyone firing from behind that fence was firing from a somewhat elevated position, and they would be firing over the heads of anybody standing on the curb, as a bystander.
Okay.
Yeah, that to me the most intriguing part of Dr. Corsi's book is the analysis from the, and I'm going to get this wrong. What is it? A junkyard that's behind that fence, and there was a guy running a crane in the junkyard. There's an
No. There was a man by the name of Lee Bowers who was a railroad switchman.
Switchman.
He was in a railroad tower that sits in the middle of the parking lot. It's still there.
It's still there.
Yeah, in fact, last year, for the 50th anniversary, I participated with one of the TV shows where we actually test-fired a rifle from behind the fence and then stood in that railroad tower and to see if you could indeed see or hear that, and yes, you could. And Bowers said they heard a commotion behind the fence at the time the motorcade arrived, and that something caught his attention, either a flash of light or a puff of smoke. And that's another thing I might point out, that several witnesses, including Nellie Connolly and Senator Ralph Yarborough, who were riding in the car behind the Secret Service car behind Kennedy, and they said they smelled gunpowder as they came through the lower end of the plaza. Mm-hmm. Well, the argument is that modern rifles don't smoke, okay? Well, yes, they do, especially if they're recently oiled, and that oil will burn off, and you get a nice little puff of smoke. And to settle that argument, I have a frame from the Dave Wegman film that shows the puff of smoke drifting off the grassy knoll.
Okay.
Mr. Mars, can you go into a little bit about some of the witnesses to this and their unfortunate demise, some of the people who were involved either from New Orleans or on the grassy knoll, and what kind of consequences and fates they encountered?
Well, that was one of the things. As a young reporter in the Dallas area, one of the things that struck me early on was that the palpable aura of fear that was going on in Dallas. I would go and cover stories in Dallas and then talk to police or city officials and then ask them, what can you tell me about the Kennedy assassination? And they'd turn white and almost try to crawl into the desk. And it was obvious to me that there was something amiss there. The full story had not been told. And then when you get to the dead witnesses, and I don't call them strange deaths, I call them convenient deaths, because they were convenient for anyone who did not want the truth of the assassination to come out. And once you look at the bunching of those witnesses, for instance, in 1964, 65, 66, it was people mostly in Dallas area and people who knew Jack Ruby or were associated with Jack Ruby, who all seemed to die. And I think that was to cover up the fact that there's no question in my mind that Jack Ruby and Lee Harvey Oswald were in contact with each other and were working together prior to the assassination. At the time, I could have produced more than 15 witnesses that places them together.
Yeah.
But then in 68, 69, when Jim Garrison trial starts, some people who were very pertinent witnesses to that, they all tended to die. And this continues all the way up until 77, when 9 FBI agents, all of whom had been called to testify to the House Lecamino assassinations, and they all died, okay? One fell off a ladder, one got hit by a car, one had a heart attack, and they all died before any of them could offer their testimony. So I think there's a point to where any reasonable person has to start asking, where does coincidence leave off and where does conspiracy begin?
Yeah, Mr. Mars, that's one of the things that's amazing to me is that the new chief of police from a few years ago, I think it was in 2009, the first black chief of police of Dallas, he opens up a safe there in the office, and there are transcripts of conversations between Jack Ruby and Lee Harvey Oswald. And instead of this being a big media event that they're saying, my goodness, this is amazing, these transcripts are there, it's completely made to disappear. When Jackie O's recordings made in 1964, the year after her husband is murdered, come out, and she is totally positive that it was LBJ and a group of Texas people who were involved in the murder of her husband. She didn't believe the official story for 1 second. That also is buried. Why do you think story after story that runs contrary to the narrative simply disappear?
Well, let me add to that. Do you all know who Evelyn Lincoln was?
Yes.
Yeah, Evelyn Lincoln was Kennedy's personal secretary. She was at his elbow, day and almost most nights. Do you recall ever hearing an in-depth interview with Evelyn Lincoln?
No.
Nope. They kept her quiet. But I have a letter from Evelyn Lincoln, and she says that in her opinion, there were 5 conspirators who decided to kill Kennedy because they couldn't control him, and that was Lyndon B. Johnson, J. Edgar Hoover, the mafia, and the Cubans in Florida, and military people. So now you see why you never heard an interview with Evelyn Lincoln. And this is my big boogaboo in this whole thing. Government plots, government assassination, this has gone on all through history. It's nothing new. Palace revolts, coup d'etats, you can find examples of that all through history. But my big gripe is with my own profession. I'm ashamed of it. The media, the corporate mass media. They simply will not talk about it, and they will not bring a lot of the information we're talking about right now, most of which is well documented, well understood, and as you pointed out also that the majority of people actually accept this information, and yet you don't find it on the mass media. All they can do is parrot the government propaganda that it was one lone nut and that was the end of it.
Truth, justice, and the American way. We are the voices of dissent.